Hi everybody, my name is Aaron Thomas and I'm joined with the CEO of Start.ca, Mr. Peter Rocca. Peter, how are you?
Doing good.
Great. This is another edition of Start Talk where we answer your questions. And some of the questions that you've been asking is this bobblehead sitting on this table from one of our previous episodes. So kind of let you know, this is what I call Mini Pete. And Mini Pete always likes to say no.
He's not very good at saying yes.
Yes.
For sure.
So whenever I talk to him, I say, can I get this? He whips out the bobblehead and says no. So, and we also have another question from, that question is from Rhonda Hunter Gagnon. Hopefully I said that right, because if I didn't, I know I'm going to get in trouble. Is that a bobblehead of you, Pete? It is fantastic. And also, Gary wants to know if we can create a trending hashtag called I want a Peter Rocca bobblehead. So, to the world of social media, if you would like to create this, maybe there's something that's going to be amazing that'll happen.
I estimate a trend of 3 people on that one, perhaps.
3? Well, I say at least 5 or 10.
All right.
So we'll get from there. Thank you guys very much. I love the bobblehead. We'll always make sure we have this during our Start Talks. It's great. First question from Trevor. How soon can I have FTTH tariff? I've got fiber that's been waiting to be used. So this is a fiber question, obviously. We've got a huge fiber network in London, Ontario. So go at it.
Sure. So I think what he's talking about with FTTH is probably the Bell and Rogers FTTH. So on the wholesale services that we provide over those networks, when can we get access to that? So as many people know, we're already doing high-speed internet over cable and over DSL and over our own fiber network. But FTTH is kind of the term, the FTTH tariff is kind of the term for wholesale access for competitors like us to be able to lease that last mile into the home. So currently it's off limits, and it's actually been approved. It was approved in a process almost 2 years ago, but we've been working through a lot of the mechanics in terms of how the interconnection and how it's priced and all the other things that happen in the regulatory world of telecom. So there's actually been a little bit of an update recently. So August 1st, the Commission resumed this process that's been going on. It had kind of been stopped while they took a look at all the conditions and situations and reflected on a lot of the information that had been submitted over the past, say, 6 months prior to that. So August 1st, they came out with what the rest of the process looks like, which is interveners have until the end of August to submit their comments on the process. And then there's another round which basically closes up, I think it's either September 20th or 21st, at which time the Commission will finish contemplating, reviewing all the evidence and coming out with their decision after. So generally speaking, we're hoping that it's going to be somewhere in the 4 to 6 week range after that time that we should be able to see what the tariffs look like and be able to kind of finish the last piece of interconnection and be able to start getting connected. So the short answer, I guess, is, closer towards the end of the year or maybe early next year. But unfortunately, we still have a little bit of time to wait.
Yeah, and it's a great question. And what we'll do is if there's any news that breaks out of this, we'll do another Start Talk episode or we'll post it on our social media. We'll make sure that everybody knows that if we have access to it. Appreciate that question. Next on the list is from Chris. Are you going to expand your fiber network to all of London? Now, I asked this too because I live in London, a little bit where there's no fiber.
Everyone I know is great. At hockey or baseball or any event, everyone reminds me where their address is. So we're busy with a number of pretty aggressive projects throughout the city. We're not only doing a lot of downtown infield, so we've kind of focused the last year on a lot of the downtown London area. Connecting a lot of businesses, single-family homes, multi-dwelling units. We're getting into some of the bigger buildings. We're doing Azure currently, which is right down on Talbot. And there's a couple other new buildings, as well as some other buildings that we're working to get into to bring our fiber directly to those locations. At the same time, we have a number of projects that are getting us kind of to the outskirts. So we have a project right now that's getting us up to the northeast end of the city. We have another project that's heading down south a little bit. And early next year, we have another project that's heading up to the northwest. So we're we're kind of balancing our efforts in terms of, doing both, continuing the expansion in the downtown area as well as getting to some other areas. In terms of, are we going to get to every address in the entire city? That would be a pretty ambitious plan, and certainly more capital than we have access to at right now. But, we're continuing to basically everything that we're able to do, reinvest the capital to bring fiber to as many people as possible. We're working on. So I can't say that, we're going to hit every address or what our kind of schedule is, but we're just starting the planning process for next year. And again, it's pretty aggressive.
Great news. Matt writes in, what are the next steps in third parties being able to provide service on FTTH installations? And I think you covered most of that prior to.
So that's pretty much the same question as the first one. So we're hoping to have more information, in kind of middle of October.
Perfect. Matt Smith, he asks, can I resell my internet connection?
If you're an enterprise or carrier customer, absolutely. If you're talking about like residential home service, then the way that the packages are designed and priced are really designed for single family use. And our terms and conditions, do have clauses that it is for, single family use. But if somebody is looking at being able to, how can they connect to their own building, give us a call and we'll talk to you about some business services that might be a good fit for you.
Great. Doc Kim writes in on Facebook and asks, will you be charging for access to certain websites in the future? No. If you are, should people like us be worried?
Yeah, well, you should be worried. If people are going to start charging access to websites, or whatever site you want,
It's the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, we're not the content police or anything like that. So.
Well, that's great to hear. So Jason on Facebook writes in and says, I've noticed some service offerings such as VDSL 50 have been removed from your site in specific areas. As in my case, I was prepared to upgrade from 25 to 50, so why the change?
Well, I don't know the specific address, but I know that sometimes what happens, so VDSL is service over telephone copper lines, for those that might not be aware. And VDSL in particular has a relatively short range in terms of being able to deliver the maximum speed. So you need to be like well under a kilometer if you're going to be able to, of that loop length from where the closest node or what's called the remote DSLAM to your home. And if that distance is too far or there's any line impediments or legacy bridge chaps or any kind of something that might impede that signal, you can't get the maximum speed. And so what I would imagine is possibly happened is when the neighborhood or when the service was first launched in that area, they might have been a little optimistic about the line conditions.
Gotcha.
And sometimes, especially in the hotter months, actually a lot of people are not aware that heat actually affects, the temperature affects copper, because copper expands, and as it expands it attenuates and all kinds of other geeky stuff. But what that does is actually limits the capacity of that loop. And so it could just be that after being installed and looking at the environmental conditions that they couldn't reliably deliver 50 megs over that circuit. But it could also be a database error. So give us a call and we'd be happy to look at it.
Oh, that's great. Let's get down to an interesting one. Are you planning to introduce 1 gigabit speed?
Yeah, actually, especially on our own fiber plant. So it's a little more challenging on the cable service, and just being able to deliver a reliable 1 gig service over cable plant is actually really challenging, even with the newer modems that are the DOCSIS 3.1 modems. They still run into a capacity issue on the node, and you might get a gig service, but sometimes you're getting 600 megs, and sometimes it's just still super fast, but it's more challenging to kind of get your top speeds all the time. And additionally, the way that the tariffs are priced right now, the cost for us to deliver a gig service would be very difficult for us to be able to launch a competitive product. On our own fiber plant, however, we absolutely are going to be launching gig service for both. We already offered on the enterprise scale for businesses, but also on the small business and residential. This fall, after our new data center is launched, we'll be making those speeds available on our own fiber network.
Oh, that's great. So a question from a couple people who are looking to get some information on, I guess, your opinion on internally what we do and maybe in the future what we do with some of our equipment here. So Jason and DM ask, do we use MPLS, or what is our type of router system to make the best efforts within an ISP?
Yeah, so we have our network spreads across a number of different cities. So we have multiple data centers in London, in Toronto, New York, and Chicago. Kind of as how we, our network, core network is kind of architected. And currently we're not using MPLS. We're using dedicated point-to-point wavelength services between all of our nodes. And we have, built a ring between our core infrastructure. We're actually up, as we move to this new data center that we're going to be opening, it's targeted November 1st. We're re-architecting our network, and we're moving from 10 gig wavelengths, and we're kind of upgrading everything to 100 gig. So currently, in most of those cities, we're using various different selection of Cisco routers, depending on the size and the number of ports we need as different types of routers. But as we re-architect to this 100 gig infrastructure, we're looking at moving likely the Juniper MX series, and at that time we'll likely be putting MPLS throughout the network.
Oh, great. And I'm sure there's a lot of internal reasons why we do what we do, and
yeah, absolutely.
And we're not gonna share it all, but we appreciate the question.
Try to be as transparent as we can, for sure.
Exactly. So here's a great question from Jason. How many tier 1 ISPs do you peer with directly?
Quite a few. So a lot of for example, the reason that we're in New York and Chicago, we don't have any customers in New York or Chicago, but the reason we've built our network out there is that's where we can interconnect with a number of other networks. So we connect, for example, to major players. So the Amazons and Googles and Netflixes and Microsofts and Verizons and Comcasts and all those types of networks where we directly peer to. So we kind of even bypass this whole idea of tier 1 transit provider. And we extend our network basically, so our network's directly connected to those other networks. For networks that we don't have a direct relationship with, so for example, if there's a company in Europe or a site in Europe that you're accessing, we may or may not have a direct connection with them in New York or Chicago. But for the kind of connections or those type of networks that we don't have a direct connection, that's when we use transit providers or tier 1 transit providers. And for those, we have quite a diversity as well. We have GTTN Layer, Hibernia, Hurricane, Cogent, Telia. I'm not sure if I said Telia already.
We've got at least 5 so far.
Yeah. I know I'm missing. I think I'm missing at least one more in there. But we have a diverse connection to large carriers, and the reason that we do that is each of those carriers have different characteristics. So, for example, Hibernia has a strong U.S. presence, and so it gets us into a lot of the southern U.S. Whereas EXO was another one. Actually, I don't know if we still have EXO, maybe not. Whereas some of our other carriers have more of a strong European connection, and so we have a much faster connection to Europe as a result of directly connecting to them.
Great.
So short answer is a variety, and we use them for both redundancy, but performance is the biggest reason we have so many of them.
Perfect. Last question on today's show. What is the schedule for future fee increases for Start.ca?
Well, first of all, we don't schedule them. We try to keep our fees as low as we can. So we talked a little bit about the FTTH process that's happening. At that same time, that same kind of date is when the fee structures for wholesale will kind of become final rates. And so once those rates come out, we'll take a look at them and see whether or not we have to make any adjustments to our plans at that time. But in the past, wherever possible, if our rates have gone down, we've always passed those savings on to our customer.
Perfect. Well, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Aaron Thomas, the marketing director here at Start.ca. This is Start Talk, and once again, Peter Rocca, CEO of Start.ca, and the bobblehead right here. We appreciate your time very much. Thanks for watching Start Talk.
Thanks for watching.